The crystal wine glass trembled slightly in Natalie Dawson's hand as she sat at the head of the long mahogany dining table, the warm glow of candlelight flickering off the polished silverware. Across from her, Ethan Dawson, her husband of 15 years, stood confidently, raising his glass. His voice, smooth and practiced, carried across the room as he made a toast. To a new beginning without you. A hush fell over the dining room. Forks hovered midair. The scent of roasted turkey and cinnamon-spiced apple crumble clashed with the thick tension now suffocating the air. Natalie felt Olivia, her younger sister, grip her hand under the table, a silent anchor in the sudden storm. Their parents, seated nearby, became intensely interested in their dinner plates, while their closest friends exchanged awkward glances. But the true betrayal cut deeper. The men Ethan worked with, the ones she had entertained, supported, and smiled for at countless dinner parties, raised their glasses in agreement. A chorus of approval, a celebration of Ethan's supposed triumph. Natalie took a slow, deliberate sip of wine, the Cabernet she had been saving for a special occasion. She set her glass down with precision, forcing a steady smile. Her eyes met Ethan's across the perfectly prepared Thanksgiving feast, across the turkey she had spent hours brining, the stuffing made from scratch, the cranberry sauce simmered to perfection. "To a new beginning," she replied, her voice even belying the storm raging within her. What Ethan didn't know was that the game had already begun, and by the time he realized it, he would be several moves behind. The conversation gradually resumed, but the undercurrent of unease was thick enough to slice with the carving knife Ethan still held in his hand. He smiled, effortlessly slipping back into the role of the charming host, just as he had for the last 15 years. But Natalie saw him for what he was now, a man who believed he had control, who thought he had meticulously orchestrated every detail of their separation. "More wine, Natalie?" Mark Hughes, Ethan's business partner, offered with an attempt at casual cheer. "No, thank you," she responded, offering him a tight-lipped smile. "I need to keep a clear head tonight." 3 months ago, she wouldn't have recognized the woman she had become. She had been Natalie Dawson, the perfect wife, the woman who planned charity events, hosted holiday gatherings, and ensured Ethan's colleagues always saw a picture-perfect marriage. The woman who ignored the late-night calls, the faint traces of unfamiliar perfume, and the way Ethan's eyes scanned the room, always searching for something or someone else. But that Natalie had died the day she found the text messages. They weren't from another woman. That would have been easier to understand. No, these were messages to their friends, to her family, to Ethan's lawyer. Plans made without her. Plans that detailed how to minimize what she would receive in the divorce, how to paint her as unstable, how to erase 15 years as though they had never mattered. Natalie smiled at Ethan. He had no idea what was coming next. Natalie sat across from Jake Ellison in his dimly lit office, her fingers tightly gripping the armrest of the worn leather chair. The private investigator leaned forward, sliding a thick folder across the desk. The edges of the papers inside were slightly curled, as though they had been handled repeatedly. A small part of her still clung to the hope that this was all a mistake, that somehow Ethan wasn't the man she had begun to suspect. But as she opened the folder and scanned the documents, the last remnants of that illusion shattered. "He's been planning this for over a year," Jake said, his voice even but firm. "Every financial move he's made, every asset transfer, it's all been deliberate." Natalie flipped through page after page of evidence. A second mortgage on their home, taken out 3 months ago without her knowledge. Transfers to offshore accounts, money siphoned from their joint savings in increments just small enough to avoid suspicion. Stock sold from their portfolio, with the funds funneled into an account under Ethan's name alone. And then the final blow. A lease agreement for a luxury apartment in Chicago, signed 6 weeks earlier. "Chicago," she murmured, more to herself than to Jake. She had always assumed his new job opportunity meant temporary business trips, not a permanent relocation. He never planned to take you with him, Jake confirmed. He's positioning himself to file for divorce under Illinois laws. More favorable to him, less protection for you. The weight of the betrayal settled in Natalie's chest, heavy and suffocating. Ethan had always been meticulous, always 5 steps ahead of everyone else. And for so long, she had played the part of the dutiful wife, trusting that he would never use that precision against her. But now she saw the truth. Ethan had never been planning a divorce. He had been planning her erasure. "What do I do now?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Jake leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You fight back. Quietly, smartly. We gather everything. We make sure that when he thinks he's outplayed you, he realizes too late that he's the one cornered." Natalie nodded slowly, determination hardening inside her. The Natalie of 3 months ago might have broken down, might have begged Ethan for an explanation. But that woman no longer existed. "Then let's move to phase 2, she said, closing the folder. Ethan had made one fatal mistake. He had underestimated her. And now, for the first time in their marriage, she was the one holding the cards. The shift was subtle at first. Conversations would pause when Natalie entered a room, only to resume in hushed voices as soon as she turned away. People who once greeted her with warmth now met her with polite distance, their eyes flickering with quiet judgment. She had spent years building friendships, hosting dinner parties, and supporting Ethan's career, only to realize that loyalty was fragile when faced with the weight of a well-crafted lie. Ethan had always been skilled at controlling a narrative, and now the story he was weaving was about her. He had begun spreading the idea that she was unstable, framing her as emotionally fragile in ways that were nearly impossible to refute. He never outright accused her of anything but planted enough doubt to make people question what they thought they knew. He reminded friends of how difficult things had been for her since the miscarriage, how she had struggled with grief longer than expected. He painted himself as the patient, devoted husband, burdened with a wife who couldn't quite keep herself together. Those who didn't know the full story nodded in sympathy, quietly shifting their allegiance to Ethan without ever realizing they had done so. The miscarriage had been a turning point in their marriage, though Natalie hadn't seen it at the time. It had left her hollow for months, a grief that Ethan had initially met with understanding. But patience had an expiration date, and as the months passed and she continued to struggle, his support turned to quiet frustration. He had always been a man who saw life in terms of efficiency. Setbacks were meant to be managed, obstacles overcome. When she failed to recover at the speed he expected, he withdrew. His reassurances became less frequent, his affection more distant. Eventually, he had told her, in the most logical and detached way possible, that perhaps it had been for the best. A child, he had reasoned, would have made things complicated. Now he was using that grief as a weapon against her. He had convinced people that she was emotionally unstable, subtly suggesting that perhaps she had developed unhealthy coping mechanisms. Drinking too much, struggling with anxiety, unable to manage stress. It was a careful manipulation, a gradual dismantling of her credibility that ensured, if she ever tried to fight back, people would hesitate before believing her. Even Lauren, his sister, had initially fallen for it. She had always been loyal to Ethan, trusting in the version of events he presented. When he told her that Natalie wasn't herself, that he was worried about her, she had accepted it without question. But then the cracks in Ethan's story began to show. While at his house one afternoon, Lauren had come across his open laptop. She wasn't the type to pry, but something about the way Ethan had spoken lately, his almost rehearsed concern, had unsettled her. What she found confirmed what she hadn't wanted to believe. There, in a series of emails, Ethan had outlined his plan to minimize Natalie's financial claims, positioning her as unstable to justify giving her as little as possible in the divorce. He had been careful with his wording, but the intention was clear. This wasn't a man concerned for his wife's well-being. This was a man ensuring his own advantage. The guilt hit Lauren hard. She had unknowingly played a role in isolating Natalie, believing the subtle narrative Ethan had fed her. Realizing the extent of his deception, she knew she couldn't stay silent. She arranged to meet Natalie, handing over the evidence she had found. The look on Natalie's face wasn't one of surprise but of confirmation. It was as if she had already known the truth but needed to see it written out to make it real. Ethan had spent months setting the stage, crafting an illusion that painted Natalie as the problem. He had underestimated her, assuming she would crumble under the weight of his deception. But he had also underestimated the people around him. Lauren now saw him for who he truly was, and she wasn't the only one. The foundation of his carefully constructed narrative was beginning to crack. The courthouse was cold, its marble floors echoing with the quiet murmurs of attorneys and the rhythmic clicking of polished shoes. Natalie sat beside Margaret Hollis, her lawyer, gripping the edge of the wooden bench as they waited outside the judge's chambers. The folder in her lap contained everything: financial statements, emails, and evidence of Ethan's systematic attempt to strip her of everything before she even knew a divorce was coming. She had spent the last 15 years of her life in carefully curated social circles, attending charity events, playing the role of the supportive wife. Now she was sitting outside a courtroom, preparing to dismantle the life Ethan had so carefully constructed. Margaret, composed and unreadable, glanced at her watch. "Stay calm," she murmured. "We have the evidence. Let them underestimate you." The door to the judge's chambers opened, and a clerk motioned them inside. Across the room, Ethan's attorney Lawrence Palmer was already seated. He was an older man, polished and self-assured, the kind of lawyer who thrived in high-stakes battles. Ethan wasn't present, but his absence didn't matter. His fingerprints were all over this case, his strategy unfolding exactly as expected. The judge, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes behind silver-rimmed glasses, wasted no time. Margaret presented their case first, methodically laying out the evidence. Ethan had funneled marital assets into private accounts, taken out a second mortgage without Natalie's knowledge, and had been systematically restructuring their financial life to leave her with as little as possible. The documents proved that while Ethan had been playing the role of a supportive husband in public, he had been preparing for her erasure in private. Lawrence was smooth in his rebuttal, shifting effortlessly into a narrative designed to cast doubt on Natalie's claims. He painted her as emotionally erratic, still struggling from past traumas, making reckless financial decisions out of spite. He suggested that the investigator she had hired was an invasion of privacy, that her actions were those of a woman acting irrationally rather than strategically. He framed Ethan's financial moves as nothing more than routine estate planning, a responsible decision by a man preparing for a career transition. Natalie kept her expression neutral, but anger burned beneath the surface. Ethan's strategy was clear. If he couldn't erase her, he would discredit her. But what he hadn't counted on was the strength of the evidence. The judge listened intently, flipping through the documents in front of her. When she finally spoke, her tone was firm. Ethan's actions were not standard financial planning, she pointed out, but a clear attempt to move assets in anticipation of a divorce. She ruled that all marital assets would be frozen immediately. Neither party could transfer, sell, or otherwise dispose of any shared property until further notice. Furthermore, Ethan was ordered to provide a full accounting of all financial transactions within the last 6 months, including offshore accounts. The decision was swift and it hit its mark. The emergency injunction meant that Ethan's careful planning had been for nothing. The assets he thought were securely in his control were now locked. The money he had tried to hide would now be scrutinized. He had spent over a year ensuring that when he left, he would leave her with nothing. In one afternoon, that plan had unraveled. As they exited the chambers, Margaret allowed herself a rare smirk. "That went better than expected," she said. He's going to be furious. Natalie exhaled slowly, a weight she hadn't realized she was carrying lifting slightly. For the first time in months she had the upper hand. Ethan had spent their entire marriage making calculated moves, always certain he was in control. But now he was the one playing defense. And the game had only just begun. Ethan had always been a man who thrived on control. His life was built on careful calculations, on ensuring every variable bent to his advantage. For years, Natalie had been just another element in his structured world. A predictable force he could manage with charm, authority, and well-placed manipulation. But now, for the first time, she was slipping beyond his reach, and he was running out of ways to stop her. The first sign of his desperation came in the form of an unexpected phone call. Natalie sat in the waiting area of the Newberry Street Gallery, her portfolio resting on her lap, her fingers tightening around the leather binding as she steadied herself. This was supposed to be her fresh start, the first step in reclaiming a life that had once been entirely hers. Art had always been her passion, long before she became Ethan Dawson's wife, long before she let herself shrink into the role he had carved out for her. When the gallery director, Isabel Carter, finally stepped out of her office, her expression was unreadable. She invited Natalie in, motioning for her to sit, and then folded her hands on the desk. There was a pause. One waited with something just beneath the surface. "Before we begin," Isabel said, "I want to be upfront with you. Your husband called me yesterday." The words landed like a punch. Natalie's stomach twisted, but she forced herself to remain composed. She should have expected this. Ethan had already tried to control the legal battle, had already attempted to turn friends and family against her. Of course he would go after this too. Isabel continued, her voice measured. Ethan had framed it as a concern, a gentle warning. He had mentioned Natalie's supposed emotional instability, had hinted that she might not be in the right state of mind to take on a demanding job. Then, as if to further cement his case, he had suggested that some of the work in her portfolio wasn't entirely her own. Natalie exhaled slowly. This was Ethan at his most insidious, not outright accusing, but planting just enough doubt to make others hesitate. He didn't need to prove anything. He just needed people to question. Isabel studied her, waiting. Natalie met her gaze and with a steady voice, said the one thing she knew to be true. "Everything in that portfolio is mine." A beat passed, then Isabel nodded. "I thought as much." The conversation shifted, moving into the interview, into discussions of restoration techniques and curatorial philosophy. Natalie answered each question with confidence, feeling a renewed sense of purpose with every word. She had spent so long doubting herself, so long living in the shadow of a man who had convinced her that she was nothing without him. But sitting in that office, speaking about the work that had once brought her joy, she felt something shift. By the end of the meeting, Isabel extended her hand. The job was hers. As Natalie stepped out into the crisp Boston air, she glanced at her phone. A missed call from Ethan. She ignored it. He had spent years orchestrating every move in her life, dictating what she could and couldn't do. But he had no control over this. This victory was hers alone. The house was unnervingly quiet when Natalie stepped inside, as though it was holding its breath. The air was heavy with the scent of whiskey, the dim glow of the kitchen light casting long shadows against the walls. Ethan was waiting for her, leaning against the counter, his phone beside him, a half-empty glass resting near his fingertips. His posture was deceptively relaxed, but Natalie recognized the tension in his shoulders, the barely contained frustration simmering beneath his calm exterior. She had seen this version of him before, the composed, reasonable man who always knew how to say just enough to tilt the conversation in his favor. This was the same tactic he had used throughout their marriage, framing himself as the logical one, the rational one, while slowly eroding her confidence. But this time, she wasn't the woman who had once questioned herself at every turn. Ethan exhaled, breaking the silence, as if carefully considering his words. He wasn't angry yet, not outwardly. That would come later if persuasion didn't work. His voice was measured, slipping into the familiar cadence of negotiation. He spoke about reconsidering, about the life they had built, about the future they could still have. It was a performance, one designed to make her hesitate, to make her wonder if she was the one being impulsive. But Natalie had seen too much to be swayed. The emails, the hidden accounts, the months, years of deception were evidence enough of who he truly was. He hadn't been trying to salvage their marriage when he plotted behind her back, when he secured an apartment in another state, when he fabricated stories about her instability. He had never wanted to fix things. He had only wanted to control the way they ended. She didn't argue with him. There was no point. Instead, she walked past him, her footsteps slow and deliberate as she made her way upstairs. The sound of her suitcase wheels scraping against the hardwood was the only response she gave him. She could hear him in the kitchen, still talking, his voice tightening slightly now, the patience beginning to fray. There was an edge to it, a quiet warning laced between the words. She had seen him like this before. When things didn't go according to plan, when control slipped through his fingers. She packed quickly, her movements efficient. There was no room for sentimentality, no lingering over shared memories. The framed wedding photo on the dresser remained untouched, its glass reflecting back a life that was already behind her. She took only what she needed, the essentials that would allow her to move forward without ever looking back. When she returned downstairs, Ethan was standing by the door, blocking her path for just a second too long. The look in his eyes had shifted from persuasion to something colder, something closer to resentment. He didn't raise his voice, didn't lash out, he never did. Instead, his words came quiet and sharp, a final attempt to leave a mark before she walked away. She had spent years internalizing those subtle jabs, allowing them to sink in and fester. But now they had no power over her. She stepped past him without hesitation, out into the crisp night air, her breath visible in the cold. For the first time in years she felt weightless, unburdened by the fear that had once kept her tethered to him. The driveway stretched ahead, her car waiting like an open door to the life she was about to reclaim. She didn't glance back, didn't let nostalgia or regret cloud her decision. The house behind her belonged to a version of herself that no longer existed, and she had no intention of returning. The morning air was crisp as Natalie stepped onto Newberry Street, the city still quiet in the early hours. The holiday lights lining the storefronts twinkled against the gray December sky, a soft reminder that a new year was approaching. She had always loved this part of Boston. The old brick buildings, the art galleries tucked between boutiques, the quiet hum of creativity in the air. But today it felt different. Today it felt like hers. She adjusted the strap of her portfolio bag as she approached the entrance to the gallery. Just a few weeks ago, stepping into a place like this would have felt like an indulgence, something from a past life she had long abandoned. But now it was a doorway to something entirely new. Inside, the space was bright and open, the walls adorned with carefully curated pieces. There was a stillness in the gallery, an energy that pulsed beneath the surface, filled with the promise of new beginnings. Isabel Carter, the director, greeted her with a warm nod, gesturing toward the back office. There was no hesitation as Natalie followed her, no lingering doubt or second-guessing. The weight of Ethan's influence, of his carefully placed whispers meant to keep her in his shadow, had lifted. He had spent months trying to strip her of her independence, trying to control the story of her life even after she had broken free. But in the end, his efforts had only solidified her resolve. She had expected some part of her to feel unsettled by the sudden shift, to grieve the life she had left behind. Instead, there was only relief. For so long, she had been Ethan Dawson's wife before she had been anything else. Her world had been measured in his successes, her worth tied to the role she played in his carefully constructed life. Now she was stepping into something that was hers alone. As the morning passed, she moved through the gallery with ease, reviewing restoration projects, discussing upcoming exhibitions. The work felt natural, like a muscle she hadn't stretched in years but still remembered how to use. There was no second-guessing, no looking over her shoulder for approval that would never come. For the first time in a long time, she trusted herself. By midday, as she sat at her desk reviewing a portfolio, her phone buzzed. Ethan's name flashed across the screen. She watched it ring, her heartbeat steady, waiting for the moment of hesitation that never came. She let the call go unanswered. There was nothing left to say. No final conversation that could undo what had already been done. No words that could change the fact that she was no longer his to control. Instead, she turned back to her work, a quiet smile forming as she flipped through the pages before her. Outside, the city moved forward, and for the first time in years so did she. The numbers stared back at Natalie from the financial statements scattered across her kitchen table. Offshore accounts, wire transfers, and shell corporations. It was all there, carefully orchestrated and deliberately concealed. Ethan had spent over a year setting this up, siphoning funds under the guise of corporate investments, but something wasn't adding up. The most recent transfer, a substantial sum sent to an entity in Chicago, felt different. It wasn't just about hiding money for the divorce. This was something bigger, something calculated beyond ensuring she left with nothing. She had known Ethan was meticulous, but the extent of his deception still caught her off guard. He hadn't just been planning to leave her. He had been constructing an exit strategy that involved far more than their marriage. The offshore accounts suggested a long-term plan, one that had been unfolding beneath her feet, while she had been blind to his true intentions. The thought made her stomach turn. A knock at the door pulled her from her thoughts. The hour was late, the city outside already quiet, but she moved to the door without hesitation. Through the peephole she spotted Jake, shifting his weight impatiently. He looked as if he had been carrying something heavy, not in his hands but in his mind. She opened the door and let him in, barely stepping aside before he placed a small envelope on the table. He didn't need to say much. She knew what that meant. Another piece of the puzzle had surfaced. Inside the envelope were Ethan's recent phone records, carefully compiled and marked. One number appeared too often to be ignored. It wasn't linked to a law firm or a financial institution. Instead, it belonged to a private security firm based in Chicago, the same city where Ethan had planned to relocate. Natalie's pulse quickened. This wasn't the kind of company that handled routine security matters. Their services extended beyond bodyguards and protection. They specialized in eliminating obstacles. She sifted through the pages, the weight of each new revelation pressing down on her. Ethan wasn't just protecting his money. He was securing something far more sinister. The next morning, Natalie sat across from Margaret in her law office, the gravity of her discovery settling between them. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, but the warmth did little to counter the cold reality of what they were now up against. Ethan's financial deception was no longer just about greed. It was about concealment. Margaret studied the documents carefully, flipping through the pages with a practiced eye. The details were damning. The pattern of asset transfers suggested a deliberate attempt to bury evidence, but the security firm's involvement raised more alarming questions. If Ethan had nothing to hide, why take such extreme measures? There was no denying the risk in pushing forward. Ethan had always played by his own rules, calculating each move in a way that left little room for error. But now, for the first time, he was vulnerable. If his hidden transactions were exposed, everything he had built, his career, his reputation, his carefully crafted future would crumble. Margaret knew they had to act, but the approach had to be strategic. A direct confrontation would tip him off. Instead, they needed to apply legal pressure in a way that forced him to reveal his own hand. A court motion for full financial disclosure would be the first step. He would resist, of course, but resistance would only draw more scrutiny. Natalie understood the stakes. The deeper they dug, the more dangerous this became. But there was no turning back now. Ethan had been methodical in ensuring she walked away with nothing, believing she would be too overwhelmed to fight back. He had underestimated her. As she rose from her chair, determination set in. Ethan had spent over a year constructing his escape. Now she was about to destroy it. Banda Inoa. Please continue the above story for me with the script. Ethan's growing desperation. Ethan is aware that Natalie is getting too close to his secret. He makes a cryptic phone call, suggesting he is working with someone to cover his tracks. A warning arrives. Natalie receives an unmarked package at work containing a flash drive and a note. It's not just money. Watch your back. This suggests that someone inside Ethan's 700 words. ChatGPT Inoa. Ethan's growing desperation. Ethan sat in his dimly lit office, fingers drumming against the polished wood of his desk. His phone lay face up, the glow of the screen illuminating a string of numbers. The walls of his carefully constructed life were closing in, and Natalie was to blame. She had gone from the grieving, fragile woman he had expected to a problem he could no longer control. Worse, she wasn't acting alone. The court's financial disclosure order had been the first sign that she was playing smarter than he had anticipated. Someone had guided her to it, likely her lawyer, but there was something else. She was too informed, moving too precisely. Someone was feeding her information. His grip on the phone tightened as he scrolled to a contact labeled simply D. He hesitated only briefly before pressing the call button. The line rang twice before connecting. "She's getting too close," Ethan said, keeping his voice low. A pause. The voice on the other end was deep, unreadable. "We're monitoring the situation." "That's not enough. She has a PI, a lawyer who isn't backing down, and now a court order forcing me to open my books." His pulse thrummed against his temple. If she finds out what that money was really for. "She won't," the voice interrupted, firm and final. "We'll handle it." Ethan exhaled sharply, pinching the bridge of his nose. He had spent over a year orchestrating this transition, ensuring everything aligned in his favor. Natalie was supposed to walk away with nothing but memories, not ammunition. The fact that she was pushing back, unraveling his plans thread by thread, meant that the rules had changed. "I don't care how," Ethan said, his tone darkening. "Make sure she stops digging." The call ended with a click. Ethan stared at the phone for a long moment before tossing it onto his desk. His hand curled into a fist. He needed to find out who was feeding her information before she uncovered something he couldn't bury. Natalie walked into the gallery the next morning, her thoughts still circling the conversation she'd had with Margaret the night before. Every move she made felt heavier now, like stepping through a field laced with traps. Ethan was watching, and she knew that the closer she got to the truth, the more desperate he would become. She was halfway to her office when she noticed it. A small unmarked package sitting at the center of her desk. There was no return address, no indication of who had sent it. The weight of it felt off, heavier than just an envelope of documents. Her fingers hesitated before unsealing the plain brown wrapping. Inside was a flash drive and a single slip of paper. The note was typed, the words simple but chilling. "It's not just money. Watch your back." Natalie's pulse spiked. She glanced around the room, but nothing seemed out of place. No one in the gallery looked suspicious, no lingering gazes or hurried exits. But someone had left this for her, someone who wanted her to see it. She turned the flash drive over in her palm, debating. Plugging it into her work computer was too risky. If Ethan had sent this himself, it could be bait, a virus, a way to track her movements. If it had come from someone else, someone inside his circle who was trying to warn her, then whatever was on it mattered. Her mind raced through the possibilities. There weren't many people who had access to Ethan's private dealings, but there was one name that stood out: Lauren. His sister had already expressed doubts. already slipped her key documents when she first learned about Ethan's financial manipulations. Could she be the one behind this? Natalie needed answers, but she also needed caution. She slipped the flash drive into her purse and made a silent decision. She would open it, but on her terms, in a place where Ethan couldn't control the outcome. As she left the gallery that afternoon, she felt it, the unmistakable sensation of being watched. A black sedan sat parked across the street, its windows tinted. She had walked past it before, but today it felt deliberate. Her phone vibrated in her pocket. She pulled it out, glancing at the screen. Unknown number. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Ethan had just sent his first warning. But Natalie wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. Natalie sat at her kitchen table, the flash drive resting between her fingers like a loaded gun. The note that had accompanied it still lay unfolded beside her, the stark words staring back at her. It's not just money. Watch your back. She had spent the last few days unraveling Ethan's financial deception, peeling back the layers of his carefully constructed lies. But this was something else. If the warning was true, if his corruption extended beyond his attempts to strip her of everything, then she was standing on the edge of something much larger than a bitter divorce. Her laptop sat open in front of her, the cursor blinking against a dark screen. Plugging in the flash drive felt like an irreversible step, a move that could either give her the advantage or make her a target. But hesitation was a luxury she could no longer afford. Taking a deep breath, she inserted the drive. A single folder appeared, labeled "For Your Eyes Only." Her pulse quickened as she clicked on it, revealing a set of documents and 2 video files. The first file was a scanned contract, Ethan's name at the top, alongside the logo of a high-end security firm based in Chicago. The same firm Jake had uncovered in his investigation. The details were vague, masked behind legal jargon, but one thing was clear. This wasn't a typical security agreement. The firm specialized in eliminating problems. Her stomach twisted as she opened the second document. An email chain between Ethan and a man named Derek Coleman, an executive at the firm. The subject line read, "Final Arrangements." She skimmed through the emails, her breath catching on certain phrases. Asset relocation finalized. Ensure discretion. She cannot find out. Termination will be handled as discussed. The word termination sent a shiver down her spine. It was vague enough to be legally defensible, but chilling in its implication. Termination of what? Or worse, of who? Her fingers trembled as she clicked on the first video file. The footage was grainy, taken from what looked like a hidden security camera in Ethan's office. He sat behind his desk, leaning forward, speaking in low tones to an unseen man. She turned up the volume. "Need this handled before I make the move. Loose ends tied up." A pause. Then the other voice. "Derek Coleman. We'll take care of it. Just make sure the payment clears." Natalie's breath hitched. The final email. The security contract. The offshore payments. Ethan wasn't just hiding money. He was arranging something far more dangerous. Power shift and retaliation. For the first time since this battle began, Natalie felt the shift. Ethan had spent months manipulating her, maneuvering every piece into place to ensure he came out ahead. But he had underestimated her. He had assumed she would crumble, that she would accept her fate and walk away quietly. He had never expected her to fight back. She shut her laptop, her mind racing. This wasn't just about divorce anymore. If these documents became public, Ethan wouldn't just lose his assets. He would lose his career, his reputation, possibly even his freedom. He had spent his life crafting an image of control, of power, of being untouchable. Now she held something that could destroy him. She needed to be smart. If Ethan found out she had this, he would retaliate. And based on what she had just seen, he wouldn't hesitate to cross the line. Reaching for her phone, she called Jake. He answered on the first ring. "I have something," she said, her voice steady. Something big. A pause. Then Jake's serious tone. How big? Enough to ruin him. Jake exhaled sharply. Then we need to move carefully. If Ethan's dealing with people who tie up loose ends, you just became his biggest problem. The words settled over her like a weight, but she refused to let fear take hold. Ethan had already taken too much from her. She wouldn't let him take anything more. The next step had to be calculated. She forwarded the documents to Margaret, ensuring her lawyer had a copy in case anything happened to her. Then she backed up the files to a secure cloud. If Ethan wanted to erase this evidence, he would have to erase every trace of it. By the time she finished, her phone buzzed again. A text message. Ethan, we need to talk. Now. She stared at the screen, her heart hammering. He knew.
Understand
Int. Ethan's office, night. Ethan's grip tightened around his phone as he stared at the unanswered message. Natalie hadn't responded, and that meant one thing. She had something on him. His jaw clenched as he paced the room, his mind working through the possibilities. She had gotten too close. He should have shut this down sooner. He should have kept better control. Another call connected. Derek Coleman's voice came through the line. She has it, Ethan muttered. Derek didn't hesitate. Then you know what needs to be done. Ethan closed his eyes, exhaling. He had spent his career making ruthless decisions, ensuring every move he made placed him further ahead. He had justified every deception, every manipulation as a means to an end. And now, for the first time, the consequences were out of his hands. I'll handle it, he said, ending the call. For the first time in his life, he wasn't sure if he would win.
Understand
Exit. Natalie's apartment, night. Natalie sat in her car outside her building, watching the shadows move under the streetlights. The weight of what she had uncovered pressed against her, but beneath it was something else, resolve. Ethan was dangerous, but she was no longer the woman he had controlled for 15 years. She had the upper hand now, and he knew it. As she stepped out of the car, a dark figure in the distance made her pause. The black sedan was back, parked across the street, its headlights off. She turned toward her building, but before she could reach the door, her phone buzzed again. A blocked number. A single message. Leave this alone or you won't get another warning. Natalie's fingers tightened around the phone. He was scared. Good. Because she wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever. The story of Natalie and Ethan resonates deeply in 2025. A time when power dynamics in relationships, corporate corruption, and personal resilience are more relevant than ever. In a world where financial independence and digital security are critical, Natalie's journey serves as a cautionary tale and a source of empowerment. It highlights how deception can operate beneath the surface of seemingly perfect relationships, and how financial manipulation is often the first tool wielded by those seeking control. With an increasing number of individuals facing economic uncertainty and legal battles, this story reminds us to always be aware of our financial rights, and to never blindly trust even those closest to us. One of the most pressing takeaways from Natalie's experience is the importance of financial literacy and autonomy. In 2025, more than ever, individuals, especially women, must ensure they have access to and control over their own financial assets. Ethan's ability to move money without Natalie's knowledge reflects a real-world issue where financial abuse is often overlooked in relationships. Understanding joint accounts, credit access, and legal rights in marriage is crucial for protecting oneself from financial ruin. Another key aspect is the role of technology in both deception and exposure. Ethan's hidden transactions and security dealings were uncovered through digital footprints, email trails, and legal documents that Natalie and her investigator tracked down. In today's world, where information is stored online and digital forensics are becoming a crucial tool in legal battles, this story underscores the necessity of staying informed about personal data security, cyber tracking, and legal digital evidence collection. Beyond the financial and technological aspects, this story is ultimately about power and reclaiming agency. Natalie's evolution from a passive participant in her marriage to an active force in dismantling Ethan's control is a testament to resilience. It teaches us that standing up to manipulation, whether in relationships, workplaces, or legal battles, requires careful strategy, emotional strength, and the right support system. In 2025, where gender dynamics, legal inequalities, and corporate corruption remain pressing issues, stories like Natalie's remind us that justice is possible, but only when we are prepared to fight for it. Finally, the narrative highlights the importance of recognizing red flags and acting early. By the time Natalie uncovered Ethan's full scheme, he had already spent years planning her downfall. The warning signs were there, and in today's fast-paced, information-driven world, the ability to recognize and act upon them swiftly can make all the difference in protecting one's future.